Ruled out an spectacular fire at Waterport power station. No one hurt, but power is cut off to all districts as a precaution. Foul play has been ruled out. An investigation into the causes of the blaze and explosion is underway. And as we speak, power is being restored district by district. Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Newswatch. Well, no one was hurt in a spectacular fire that broke out in Waterport power station just before 2 o'clock this afternoon. But practically everyone was affected as electrical supply to all districts was immediately cut off as a precaution. A mechanical failure in engine number 1 provoked a fire which resulted in a loud explosion. Thick smoke belched out from the generating station, causing concern amongst residents of the area. They were told to stay indoors and keep their windows closed. The emergency services were soon on the scene, with the City Fire Brigade fighting to control the blaze and police ensuring public order. It took several hours for the blaze to be completely extinguished and some time after that before power could be gradually restored. Well, with me live in the studio is the City Electrical Engineer Manolo Alessio. Mr. Alessio, thank you very much for joining us at such a short notice. Can I ask you what's the latest? Because 6.5 hours into this incident, some districts in Gibraltar remain in the dark.
They do. We've had difficulty restoring. Our first job was to isolate power to allow the City Fire Brigade to actually extinguish the fire. They took about 3 hours, and before we were allowed to go back into the station. They also protected our high voltage switchgear, which is sited within the station, because the fire has practically destroyed number 1 set and a lot of damage to the other 2 sets, and we were concerned that water damage could have caused even further delays than the ones that Gibraltar is currently experiencing.
Do we know as we speak which areas have electricity and which don't?
Most of the South District, as I left the station a few minutes ago, were back on power. We were starting to restore the North District. One of the problems that we have in restoring power after such a long outage is that we have other system failures, which makes it more difficult. In addition to that, people live thin switched on.
Why is that? It just triggers something else in the system?
Things like closing mechanisms for switchgear, which are battery operated. After a period of time, the batteries, because they're not being recharged, run down, and it makes it extremely more difficult to restore power.
Can you give guarantees to those without electricity at the moment that power will be restored for later tonight, that they will not go overnight without any power?
We are quite confident that arising from this incident, that if nothing else happens, is that power would be restored to all districts tonight.
And I suppose there's a procedure to follow, that powering up is done in districts, sections. I suppose that's the way you handle things. Is there any guarantee you can give that what you're now feeding people can sustain itself overnight, or can people expect further power cuts?
We don't expect any more power cuts. We have sufficient installed capacity despite having lost, for now, Waterport power station. And this was our concern, as I was saying earlier, because the switch room at Waterport and the control room is still usable. It means that we have sufficient installed capacity in the system to supply Gibraltar tonight, tomorrow, and at least until the load doesn't increase in the future.
These are exceptional circumstances, but nonetheless some people will argue that more than 6 hours without electricity is unacceptable.
People need to understand that the first priority was to put up the fire, and in order to do that, we need to switch off the electrical power. It would be totally unreasonable to risk human life, and although it's difficult for people, the fact that the firemen who have put their lives at risk because of the fire should not put their lives at risk because there is electricity which could cause them harm.
And one of the best news to emerge from a story like this, I suppose, is that there were no injuries, even in the initial stages, that none of your staff were harmed. I suppose you're pretty pleased about that.
Very, very, very pleased. I've seen the extent of the damage. I've seen photographs of when the engine started to blow, my staff tried to put the fire, but the blaze was such.
How close were the members of your staff to that explosion?
Within 20, 30 meters, because they heard a loud bang, and when they ran to the engine to see what was happening, the engine was still running. One of the pistons in number one line had blown out. We believe, and it has to be confirmed, that when the cylinder went out through the side, it ruptured the fuel lines, and this is why we've had such a major incident. The fuel line ruptured, and that caught fire.
And do we know what caused the fault in the first place?
Not yet. Probably a failed bearing, which caused the cylinder to basically be knocked out the side. Remember, those engines run at 500 RPM per minute. So,
without going into the full technicalities of it, can you explain to me, there's this huge fire at Waterport power station. I know you need to power down to give the city fire brigade time to do their job, but why is Gibraltar left without electricity? Can it not be sourced from OESCO, for example? Where does OESCO come in all of this?
The OESCO, which is now called the South District Power Station, and similarly as the old MOD, are able to supply us a limited amount of power. But because of the way that the system is configured, initially we have to remove the power. The fire brigade could not have done their job without actually shutting down. That in itself brings other issues when trying to restore power. And this is the reason why this sort of incident affected the whole of Gibraltar.
And is that power station now generating power for you to help in the supply that Waterport power station is giving out?
We're using the turbines which are sited at North Knoll, the OESCO, the South District Power Station, and we're also now interconnected into the old MOD inter-service generating station.
Very briefly, you're saying you're not expecting any more power cuts in the immediate future as a result of this. What sort of works and system do you now need to put in place to avoid this happening, or to perhaps fix what's been broken?
We need to investigate. I mean, from what I've looked at engine number one probably is beyond economical repair. We need to examine more closely at the damage, the fire and water damage has been caused to the other two engines, and that is going to take some time.
Manolo Alessio, thank you very much for your time this evening.
You.
And we'll be talking to Minister Gilbert Likudi on the programme a little later. But earlier today, our reporter Michael Beltran was at the scene moments after the fire started as emergency services began to arrive.
It was just before 2 o'clock this afternoon when pillars of black smoke could be seen coming out of the area behind me, and it soon became apparent that something had gone wrong in the port area, more specifically at Gibraltar. Now, emergency services appeared shortly thereafter, cordoned off the area to help tackle the blaze as a peaceful Easter Sunday was thrown into turmoil, with firefighters and police officers recalled to help tackle the blaze, which was brought under control just about 2 hours after it had started. Chaotic scenes as emergency services vehicles began to arrive at Waterport Place moments after the fire began. RGP officers directing traffic and moving people away from the area as large plumes of smoke enveloped the surrounding area. People in nearby estates gazing out towards the port area as sirens blared, most of Gibraltar by this point in the dark, so to speak, as power had been cut to the majority of the rock, and those with a clear vantage point looked out as police and fire officers tackled the fire. No visible flames, but clearly something within the Gibraltar compound was alight and causing smoke to billow out. The RGP were quick to cordon off roads to keep people and vehicles away from Waterport Place and to allow easy access for more emergency vehicles. The firefighters used foam, but Mother Nature did her part perhaps, cooling the heated roof of the building as the black smoke lessened.
Well, straight away, obviously, each essential services knows exactly what they have to do, and we work together a lot and we train together in order to be able to deal with these scenarios. On our part, obviously, it was ensuring that people within the estate right next to us, where we're standing right now, knew about the fire, were evacuated if need be, which we take that in conjunction with advice we're given from the fire brigade, or if those persons remain in their residences, obviously with their windows closed because it's safe enough for them. and then what we do is we close the relevant roads, create the relevant cordons, and ensure that people don't come close to the area, but at the same time we can continue with the traffic flow in the area so that the rest of Gibraltar can still travel around normally without causing too much of a traffic matter problem.
Was there ever a need or a moment where you thought that you would need to evacuate the area?
Well, obviously, the minute we're here, we take advice from the fire brigade and their safety officers throughout the time we're here. And they were happy that people remained in their buildings, obviously with the windows closed with the smoke. But certainly, there was at no point that we thought that the people needed to be evacuated. If they had been on the advice from the fire brigade, we would have done that straight away. But from their advice, we didn't need to.
On arrival, straight away we saw that this was something out of the ordinary. So I decided to make up appliances, make up more personnel, and recall people in who are off duty.
Okay, so when you approach a situation like this, how were you able to? What was the strategy in order to tackle a fire that you couldn't get too close to?
Well, not just a fire of this type, but any type of incident. The main priority initially is to get as much information as you can, both of what has happened, who, any people who may be trapped inside, persons reported, and so on. In terms of the supply, we need the supply isolated, obviously, because if we apply water or foam to live equipment, that doesn't go well. So the main priorities initially was whether there was any persons reported. Then we isolated the electrical supply and the supply lines for diesel that go to the generators as well. So those were the main priorities initially prior to committing anybody in.
Okay, and so how long did it take to bring it under control?
Approximately 3/4 of an hour to an hour to bring it under control. Problem is it was very treacherous conditions inside. Visibility was zero, so we have something what we call thermal image cameras. That helps us detect heat in areas with poor visibility. We were using those as well inside with the crews inside, but again, this information coming back wasn't very accurate either. So it's a question of balancing the risks versus the benefits, and we made a decision to start committing people in and investigate whether there's any other spots of fire arising from within the incident.
The fire seemed to be under control, but work was still obviously ongoing inside, as during our interview with Station Officer Colin Ramirez, he was called back to the vicinity. And we also spoke to a number of eyewitnesses near the area who told us of their perspective.
Well, I was in Waterport Place at the time, and I saw the sort of billowing smoke and the alarms going off and so on. Then the power went out, and that's when I looked out the window and I saw what was happening. But the fire brigade were already in attendance, but it did look very, very dark, very menacing.
You were in Waterport Place itself. How quickly was that evacuated after it happened?
Very, very quickly. I think I was one of the last to leave, so I reckon it was very, very quick. It all happened very quickly. There was almost no one there when I left, let's put it that way.
Well, it was round about lunchtime, and we were having lunch, and all of a sudden we heard, well, I didn't hear anything, it was just a tremor. We were sitting at the table, and the water started moving, everything, and we were just, and it just passed away. I thought it might be a plane, or I just didn't know. And then I started smelling the smoke, and I just looked out of the window, and there was this massive smoke, black smoke. That's it, really. And then after a little while, the police came, and we had to be evacuated from our homes. And it was raining. It was really a big, because of the hassle with my mum partially disabled, and the rain and the confusion. We didn't know where to go. So, but in Bamo, everything's been fine. The firemen have been, I think they've done a brilliant job.